is this Professor Marder?
This is Seth. Yes.
Hi, I'm Colton. I'm the one that sent you the email asking for to interview.
Yep.
So basically, so I'm a senior at Wheat Ridge High School, and so for our end of year English assignment, we have to do a capstone, basically on a topic that we choose. And so I did mine on green chemistry and like its applications in sustainable energy and just overall just that. And so I prepared a few questions to ask you just to kind of get your opinion on it so that I can add a networking aspect to my presentation.
Gotcha.
Are y'all good? Can I ask questions?
Yep.
Okay, so my first question is what green chemistry solutions do you think could have the quickest impact on climate change?
So I think that well, I would say that I would broaden the question out a bit to the environment and not simply climate change.
Okay.
Um, but I would suggest um, that chemistries that de-emphasize the use of fossil fuels and incorporate biorenewable things can substantially help the environment. Um, Anything that involves burning less stuff will help the atmosphere. And so, to the extent that chemical processes can be done using processes that themselves are based on electrochemistry rather than heat, will help, but also things where the source of energy that powers the electrification of chemical plants powered by renewable energy can probably have a significant direct impact on climate change.
Got it. Okay, and then
Okay?
my second question um is so right now green chemistry is somewhat hard to apply, worldwide. It's more expensive. Even though it's better, it's going to be more difficult to apply. And so then do you think green chemistry will be able to complete with or compete with traditional methods in the next 10 years?
I think that the question lacks a sufficient definition of the specific cases. So I think that there will be elements where green chemistry can contribute and can potentially be cost effective. But I'm going to come back to the but. I think that there'll be other cases where the margins, the profit margins, are so small that it will be very challenging to change any process that people are doing. Now, here is the but. The but is cost effective. What is often not taken into account when one considers the cost of a process is the hidden cost to the environment. So if you are doing things that are destroying the environment, there is intrinsically a cost to that. That does not necessarily get passed directly on to the consumer in the same way that additional costs to do things by another method that may be, quote, more green would. When you consider things that impact the environment, it's necessary to begin to consider what are the hidden costs. What are the costs to health? What are the costs if you, for example, let's assume we have climate change, okay? And you just say, as an example, consider the wildfires that swept through Los Angeles. Um, Now you can say, well, those were due to climate change or they were in part due to climate change. Whatever you would say, the cost of those fires has been estimated in the hundreds of billions of dollars. Okay? So if you have something that mitigates climate change and decreases the number of multi-billion-dollar disasters, it's hard to assign that cost to any particular product, but it is nonetheless a cost that society is paying. And I think that as we try to educate the public about the costs and the benefits of doing things in a manner that preserves the environment, that minimizes climate change, we need people to realize that the costs come in different forms. There's the cost at the checkout counter, and then there's the cost when you have to go rebuild things that are impacted by more severe weather. And when I said the environment and not just the climate, the other thing that I was thinking about is the issue of plastics in the environment. Today, as we stand, we have a greater mass of plastics in landfill than we do the total mass of every human being on the face of the earth. That is a cost. That is a cost, and as you know, if you've read the literature or read the news, microplastics are in our body, we're eating them, and there are going to be costs associated with that. And there are humongous amounts of plastic in the ocean that's influencing marine life in a very significant way. There is a cost to that. And so, when you evaluate, let's assume we make a biorenewable plastic or a plastic that is both biorenewable and from biogenerated materials. That may cost more to produce, but if we don't add additional plastics that persist in the environment for decades or hundreds of years, um, then we're not going to have other longer term costs that we will be paying but are harder to assign to individual products. And I think it's a fallacy to ignore those costs.
Got you, got you. That makes sense. Okay. Um, and then my final question is, in countries where they're less developed than like our country, for example, how might they begin, like applying some of these like sustainable methods into their own, um, like into their own environment?
Well, um, I would just say, I'll give you an analogy. Um, when I grew up, my house had a phone. You know what it was connected to?
Like a landline?
Yes. It was connected to a landline that had a whole bunch of wires. Okay. If you were to ask, does your family still have a landline?
No, we do not.
We don't either. Okay. And that's been an evolution. When phones were introduced in developing countries, do you think they ever built in the last 30 years landlines?
Probably not. No.
No. They went to a new technology. So when you consider the fact that a substantial amount of sub-Saharan Africa, as an example, to this day has no electricity, you have the opportunity to ask, given that you're going to start from scratch in many ways, would you start with renewables or would you start by burning things? And I think that one of the ways that you can consider improving the environment um, is by encouraging the use of renewables in places that currently don't have electricity, and by economic policies through things like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund that provide low interest loans for communities in these places to make the capital investment to build out the renewables and then have those loans be paid back over a long period of time. So I think that the strategy that's going to be required is a combination of economic strategy, incentivizing people to make good choices, and in many places, depending upon whether you have wind or solar, the cost of solar is just cheaper than burning stuff today. And so I think that the economics of the situation, at least in producing energy, can be such that it can be economically beneficial to go from the get go with renewables and try to build out your electronic transmission system predicated on the fact that you will have distributed sources of energy and that it will be renewable. And to do that in the United States, we already have a grid, and the grid is by and large predicated on there is a power plant that distributes all the power everywhere. But as my house has rooftop solar, and we have batteries as well. As you move to a world that has more of that, and may have large solar farms or large wind farms, um, you're going to need a different grid that works in different ways, that's optimized in different ways. And changing something that has long been there and has huge regulatory constraints. And our grid is one of the most regulated things in the United States. Um, is different than going to a place where you don't have any of this built and asking, starting from scratch, how would we do this predicated on the technology that we have today and the economics that we have today, and not largely predicated on the technology that we had 75 years ago, which is when, a lot of the way our grid was built and conceived was done. And I think that that's where opportunities lie. I think that there are opportunities to take areas that don't have existing technologies where we don't have to say, well, we're going to have to close down X and then change to Y, but rather where you have a clean slate and you can choose Y from the outset.
Got it. All right. That's pretty much all for my questions. So thank you for giving me your time. And I hope to see you next year.
Okay. By the way, I did copy Kathy, and I would just suggest that even if you don't interview her, you might send her a quick note acknowledging, because she did say that she'd be happy to talk to you. So just from a standpoint of courtesy, you might just send her a note thanking her for her willingness to talk and saying that, while you talked to me on this particular case, um, if you come to see you might be interested in meeting with her because she runs the Green Labs. Okay, um, for all of CU Boulder, and she's thought probably way more deeply about some of these issues than I have.
Yeah, I responded to her email. She said that she would like to she would be available on Friday
Right?
around 3. And so I
Yeah.
said, "Thank you so much." And I'm going to talk to her. I'll probably ask similar questions, but probably something else.
Okay. She's going to have a different perspective, but I think it'll be a useful one. So good luck with your project, and I don't. Have you heard from CU as to whether you have been accepted yet, or is that in a week or two?
Yeah, I got accepted, so I'm a student in the engineering department for biomedical.
Okay. Sounds great. Well, I hope end up coming here. I hope you enjoy it. There are a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of good stuff going on in biomedical engineering, and I think in various departments. And when you get here, you probably should explore what is called the Biofrontiers Institute, where a fair amount of that work is done.
Got it. Thank you for the
Okay.
advice.
Have a great day.
You as well.
Cheers. Bye bye.
Bye bye.